This plot continues to thicken when it comes to Florida State and their efforts to get out of the ACC. Andy Staples has a really good article on this whole topic on on3.com. So one, watch the Andy Staples show that is live every single morning on this platform. I believe they are live at 8 p.m. Eastern, or excuse me, 8 a.m. Eastern. Very important, 8 a.m. Eastern, very big difference. But he's got a great story on this very topic on on3.com. Here's what we need to know when it comes to Florida State versus the ACC. ACC, Florida State, both suing each other. Okay, so the ACC filed for dismissal against the Florida State lawsuit, or one of their Florida State lawsuits. Now, here's where it gets kind of interesting. In that lawsuit, there is, and I want to be specific how I say this, there is language indicating a willingness to negotiate with Florida State. Now, what that language is, I don't want to get too far in the weeds because, quite frankly, it's a lot of really specific legal jargon that just, quite honestly, the main thing is the main thing here. So you're saying there's a chance. So you're saying there's a chance that Florida State could negotiate their way out of where things stand right now with the ACC. Now, obviously, everybody involved would like for that to be the case in Tallahassee. We'll talk more about that right now. But first things first, make sure you subscribe to the On3 YouTube channel. This is from a live show that you're watching right now. If you're live on YouTube, we appreciate y'all for that. You're a real one. If you're watching this as a one-off video, we appreciate you too. Just make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our live shows Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern. Appreciate y'all for that. So, the question that we ask then, if it's possible for them to negotiate their way out of it, or there is language indicating that there's a willingness to negotiate with Florida State from the ACC side of things, the question then becomes, all right, well, how much would it cost? How much we talking here? Name your price. Everyone's got a price. What's yours? Andy Staples in his article estimates that the number to get out of the deal with the ACC for Florida State would be between $150 million and, $572 million. So somewhere between those two. Now, the next question is, would they pay it? Can they pay it? I mean, $572 million, that's a whole lot of money. I think something to consider is Florida State joining another conference, notably the SEC or the Big Ten. That would make everyone involved more powerful in that deal. Whether it's the Big Ten or the SEC, you add a huge brand to your conference. If you're Florida State, you join one of the power conferences going forward into the future of college football. You're going to be one of the halves going forward. And so you join a conference where you're going to get more money. As a result of you joining the conference, you probably bolster the interest and bolster the purse for one of those conferences. They get more money overall. And in today's college athletics, like money is power, just kind of is what it is. So if Florida State were to leave the ACC, if they were to find a way to meet their number that is required, whatever that ends up being, again, between $150 and $572 million, give or take, the floodgates would open. Make no mistake about that. The floodgates would open because if Florida State leaves, we know how this works, man, in conference realignment. It's a buddy system. Nobody leaves by themselves. So if Florida State leaves, I think the natural response or natural thought would be it's either Miami or Clemson leaving with them. And if those 3 or 2 schools leave the conference, if we get one of those, major pie makers leaving the conference, like that value of the ACC, that purse becomes a little bit smaller and that brand of the ACC begins to shrink. And you probably have other schools saying, all right, well, if Florida State's leaving and Clemson's leaving or Miami's leaving and this pie becomes much smaller for us, I mean, hey, we're all on the same ship here. We see this thing taking water. Maybe we jump to the Big 12 if we're Duke or North Carolina. Maybe we jump to the Big 10 if they'll take us. I mean, that becomes a whole other conversation, a whole other can of worms to talk about. But going back to what I just said, Florida State is the one that is making the pie for the most part in the ACC. That was kind of where this whole thing really sparked, is Michael Alford going to the powers that be and saying, listen, we are the one drawing most of the intrigue here for this conference. So it's not necessarily a fair deal for us to make the entire pie and then bring home a small slice. That doesn't make any sense. If you're Florida State, you're looking at the Big Ten and the SEC and saying, Northwestern's making $35 million more than us per year? Vanderbilt's making $35 million more than us a year? What? How does that add up? How does that make sense? And if you're Florida State, can you blame them? Can you blame Florida State for wanting to get what they're worth in today's college athletics, where it seems like just about everybody and their mama is making moves for their best interest? For Florida State, I have to believe if they were to pay whatever that ridiculous sum of money is to get out of the ACC, if there is somehow a real willingness to negotiate here and there's a real out here to get through the door, I have to believe they're going to make back whatever they have to pay. Like in the long term, to be in the Big Ten, you're going to make a lot more money per year. And also what that number is right now, with what those teams make per year in the Big Ten, I have to believe Florida State joining that conference would only increase that number. So the question obviously becomes, well, where do they go? Is it the Big Ten? Is it the SEC? Josh Newberg and I were talking about this yesterday in the office, and he's been pounding this drum really for the better part of the last decade, saying if Florida State leaves the ACC, it will be to the Big Ten. Reason for that being, Florida wants to be the school in the SEC, more power to them, but for the Big Ten, they would love to expand their footprint. They'd love to be a coast-to-coast conference, because then you got USC and UCLA and Oregon and Washington, and then you go all the way down to the other side of the United States, and you got Florida State. There's a lot of talent in the state of Florida now. We all understand that. We've talked about that a fair amount on this show. There's a lot of talent in the Sunshine State, and having Florida State in your conference gives you more access to it. Because then, if I'm Michigan, I can go into a living room in Florida and say, hey, your kid is going to play a fair amount of games during his career in your state. Come to Michigan. You'll be able to see your kid play a couple times throughout his career. It's a good deal. I'm telling you, it's a real selling point for a lot of kids when it comes to their recruitment. Here's the real thing I want to talk about when it comes to this whole conversation. And I've said it a couple times when it comes to conference realignment. Like, don't trust anyone. Don't trust anyone. Because the rooms in which these conversations are happening are so freaking small, they get to control the narrative. They get to tell us whatever they want to tell us, whatever information that gets out because they want it to get out. And then on the backside of that, they get to actually do what they're doing behind closed doors. There is just the perfect cover for any kind of conversation they're having because there's so few people involved there. So they get to make this headline and leak whatever they want to leak to the media over here and make this big scene, and then all the way on the other side of things, it's, well, actually the deal got done. And Josh Newberg said it perfectly when we were discussing this. He's like, it's always impossible until it isn't. And that's the exact same thing we heard with Texas and Oklahoma. It's impossible they can leave the SEC early. A week later, it gets done. We heard the same thing with Florida State. Hey, the grant of rights, it is ironclad. It's lock solid. There's no way anybody is getting out of that deal. And now we're having this conversation around there's a willingness to negotiate, name your price kind of thing. So what do I think is going to happen? I think Florida State's leaving. When is that going to happen? I don't know, but there is too much money involved for Florida State. There's too much money to be made for Florida State to stay in the ACC. So what are they able to pay? That's a great question that I don't know a lot of people know the answer to. How much would it take? Again, we're speculating it's somewhere between $150 million and $572 million. If there is an opportunity for them to get out, they will move heaven and earth, in my opinion, to get out. Because there is not a world where Florida State should ever make less money, and this is no shade at anybody else, they should not make less money than a Northwestern or a Vanderbilt or a Rutgers or whatever other school, other brand that exists in the college sports, college football landscape. So Florida State and the ACC, the plot thickens. When is this going to happen? I feel like it's one of those things that as the buzz grows, the feeling around it kind of feels like it'll happen sooner rather than later. Now, that could be 2 years. That could be before the season. I don't know. But Florida State have to believe they're getting out, and I wholeheartedly believe their next stop would be the ACC. Hey, y'all. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.